Hello, hope you're doing well. This video is kind of sparked through some reflections that came through over the past day or so, especially after watching and seeing some of the feedback on the interview with Atlas with simulation and and just the natural synchronicity of it all. We really went into what I like to call the full spectrum awakening conversation, where we're touching on the nature of the eternal reality, the non-dual reality, typical Advaita Dhyana-based teachings, coming to resolve the paradox of the simultaneity of both emptiness and fullness, and the lived experience of that. And also exploring a lot of what's behind me in the Kalantic work, which is very much interconnected with all of this, but maybe more advanced or complex or sciencey from the typical eye. And also getting into the mechanics of fasting and the elements of well-being and healing in this physical vessel. And in just natural inquiry last night, which led to a typical cessation, which often happens, I found, post-realization over these past few years. A cessation is typically where there is kind of like this experienceless experience, where it's as if everything has come to a complete halt, a complete stopping, the most absolute emptiness, we could say, that no real concepts can go there with you, no theories, no ideas, no levels or stages of awakening, no mechanics, no science, concepts, imaginings, fantasies. All of this really doesn't come with you there. It is just a direct, absolute knowing of, we could say, maybe the peace of the self, or this pure, undifferentiated emptiness. And in that, everything is often humbled, and I'm constantly reminded of the timeless pointers and teachings of all times, which we all endlessly come back to, and then maybe oscillate from. It's like a flower. There's this constant experience, and that was very much my point with the podcast with Atlas, where often those who come to experience these cessations, or come to abide within a non-dual realization, or what many call in the non-duality Advaita scene as the absolute enlightenment or absolute realization. I've often found that this is kind of like a honeymoon phase, because nothing ever really stays static. So although there is this absolute undeniable knowing and this stable peace, there is this perpetual unfolding that continues to occur. And this is beyond concepts and theories, even though on the surface one who hears somebody speaking of concepts and theories thinks, well, they must be enraveled within those concepts and theories and ideas and all of this. But no, not necessarily the case at all, because the movement of the mind does not negate the knowing and absolute knowing of emptiness or peacefulness, or the truth, because the truth is everything. It encapsulates everything. So every thought, idea, concept, theory, every system, every practice, every teaching, everything is it already. So to say that anything is not it is, of course, we're back to where we started, essentially, once again. So this can get very nuanced, because at the same time, how is one really to know then on the surface whether a realization is abiding or not? Because if there's a movement of a bunch of ideas and thoughts, or if one is just perpetually still in silence and not saying ever a word ever again, to say either one is more it than the other is, again, not necessarily the truth. And this is what is often endlessly debated and argued upon, and gone back and forth about by those who haven't actually come to see this for themselves or come to know this for themselves. And that's why it really is just such an individual thing. In my experience, at least, the emptiness, or this simultaneity, which simultaneity is even a word almost that gets in the way, because simultaneity is kind of still reinforcing the idea that there is two things happening, and there isn't. It is literally the same. Emptiness and fullness, literally the same. Spirituality and materiality, literally the same. The most mundane of unholy of things that we could observe is literally the same as the most holy and, the most high, um, in the sense that the essential nature in which makes up the fabric of all of it is literally the same as everything else. And so, of course, if this gets held onto by the mind and conceptualized and theorized, we can go on to endless roundabouts and then get into all these complex discussions about objective morality and what is right and wrong and all these things, when in truth, the natural flow, the natural movement, the natural arisings of everything always points us to what is true. Truth always remains. It's only ever true. It cannot ever not be true. So to actually surrender and trust in that, which again is not even something we need to do because it already is and it always will be, it actually removes all sense of weight, all sense of efforting, all sense of deepened seeking, to need to get somewhere or be something or make something happen in any other way than what is already naturally happening, spontaneously happening. And so when we speak to things like even a lot of this that we went into in the podcast, we're speaking to a reality that on one end could be very conceptualized. It can create a lot of maybe even stress on the seeking path. There could be a lot of confusion because of the complexity and the vastness of it. And yet at the same time, there also can be such a spontaneity. If we come into a visceral, direct experience of the expansiveness of one's light body or spirit body, or the mechanics of the Merkaba, which is the traversing mechanism and how we travel through the universe, well, this is no different than getting in a car and driving down the street. This is no different than putting on some clothing and feeling it on your skin. This is no different than anything else we do in the most practical way. It's just that the reason why it hasn't been conceived so much is because it's been so in the dark, or it hasn't been considered, or it's so new, and so spiritual, if you will. But in truth, it's no different than anything else that we engage in. And once we can see it in this way, then we can have a very mature and balanced and neutral outlook on the navigation of what happens potentially post-awakening or post-enlightenment, as it's often typically defined. And this has been a message that I've conveyed for a long time, that, the opening into these various conversations of what one would typically define as the end point, where there can be nothing else to uncover, nothing else to enlighten to, nothing else to realize. That is actually really just the return to a naturalness that is eternal. So it's not really a beginning point, because eternity doesn't have a beginning or an end, but it is a remembrance that this is eternal. Everything about it is eternal. Everything about everything, that whatever this is endless, eternal in every single direction. Of course, there's no direction, but to give some sort of idea on how to conceive this, then this is essentially what we come to, which is so deeply humbling, because from there, and in my experience, there's just endless amounts of deepening that occur. And one of the ways, and the core of the ways in which that deepening occurs is into the compassion of God, the natural, loving, divine compassion of God that viscerally feels like a sun radiating from your chest in every direction. It engulfs you, and it engulfs everything around you, because everything that you engage is thus then being purified by this pure, innocent compassion, the compassion that has no words, the compassion that one can only really melt into. And we feel this when we, see a little puppy, or hug a child, or, give reverence to our mother or father, or something of the sort. There's so many ways that this manifests, and of course, when we've come to know this God's compassion as ourselves, as our direct identity, as the essential nature of this emptiness, it is made of this compassion. Then this is where there's nothing really that can hold it in any box. There's nothing that can define it. There's nothing that can make it, more or less of an example of what it is. It's just, that's what it is, and that's what the perpetual experience ongoingly becomes. And I alluded to this in the simulation interview, is that integration process can be quite lengthy, quite lengthy, and it continues to deepen endlessly, and humble one endlessly, and bring one into the purity and innocence endlessly, which is so beautiful. And it truly does quiet us. It brings a deeper quiet, a deeper silence, And then, of course, then when we do have things to speak, it is spoken with that compassion, with that truth, with that clarity, because it's only coming from that place. Everything is only coming from that place anyways. So what a interesting topic. It's something that we can really only dance around. I feel, this is why the topic or the term pointing is such a beautiful thing, because nothing can really describe what we're describing. One example that I've been percolating on and I was writing about is, there is truly an eternal amount, infinity amount of perceptions for any one particular thing. So then thus to find an objective, absolute perception of one thing is impossible, because it is actually empty. There is no true objective perception on any one thing. The only perception it would be completely empty, completely void of any qualities whatsoever. And this is, of course, why the mind that goes on endlessly looking for the absolute certainty in some sort of perception or idea cannot find it, and eventually comes to a certain rest or balance, a certain humility in the unknowing of things, in the lack of ability for knowledge to bring one there, but yet knowledge being a beautiful thing for exploration and eternal exploration. So again, it's that simultaneous process, which is so enjoyable and beautiful, and that's, of course, the beauty of the human experience. And yet, of course, the humbling and the exhausting of the mind to try and find that absolute one perception, that ultimate perception of any one particular thing, is just not to be had. And that, I feel, is the inevitable realization that anyone who inquires with such intensity will come to find, because they'll see that pretty much everything has been just a theory. Everything that one has conceptualized in some form has all the spaciousness within it, and has all these holes in the story. It's kind of like a news article that has been trickled down and trickled down and trickled down, or some story told and story told and story told, and at the by the time it gets to you, it's so trickled down or so different than what actually occurred. This is the essential premise that we're getting at, where there's so many holes, so much spaciousness within every story, idea, concept, thing we think is absolutely true within the subjective mind, that we come to humble ourselves eventually to see that, wait a minute, we may have believed so strongly that this one thing, this idea, this perception was so true, but in truth, we can never actually find it. And that's the beauty of true investigative power, through meditation, self-inquiry, vipassana, and all these different styles of processes, that we investigate and we investigate and we investigate to see that nothing's actually there, and only the real true fullness is there, the true love and fulfillment that has been sought out within everything and as everything. That is, the ultimate, really. And the ultimate that is not static, the ultimate that is perpetually participated in, the ultimate that just takes us, and it takes us eternally. So I feel, that's a nice intro for now. I've been sparked back into, speaking to these topics in these ways after almost 4 or 5 years of, all kinds of topics. As someone who watches my Instagram or YouTube, you can see the vast array of things that I'm conversing on and talking to all the time, and really just dancing around the core topic, which is this. And we can also see why we don't need to talk about it too much, because it inevitably will be there, and it always is there. So whether we're direct to it or not, it's still always present. And that's the beauty of the grace that can just spark for anyone at any one time, with no practices or no nothing, or with the absolute utmost devotion to practices and all of the above. So that's for each to find and each to know. But deep love. Peace.